Today we look at the steering stem, its function, how to maintain it, and we'll also look into a quick way how to adjust it. Now you may have heard it called a million different things. A yoke, the triple tree, steering head yoke, the triple clamp, the steering stem, or a steering head. Now there's three types of bearings that are found in the triple tree. There's the loose ball bearings, the closed ball bearings, and the taper roller bearings. Up until about 1985, motorcycles used what's called a loose ball bearing. These ball bearings were loose and floated around in the cup freely. Now compared to caged ball bearings, loose ball bearings actually have a smoother action. The caged ball bearings though are much easier to maintain because they go in all in one piece in one set. As with a loose ball bearing, you have to put the balls in individually. Tapered roller bearings provide great thrust and side load ratings, but compared to a ball bearing, they actually have more rolling resistance. The tapered roller bearing will last longer in the long run though. Some motorcycles already come with a tapered roller bearing, but All Balls Racing provides a great kit when it comes to replacing your steering stem bearings. Chassis bearings, if maintained on a regular basis and problems are caught before they get too bad, chassis bearings will last you a very long time. Racing applications is a little bit different. Racing is an extremely harsh environment. You're pushing the bike to the limit and you're pushing every component of that bike to the limit. Like I stated in an earlier video, one of my biggest pet peeves is when I buy a bike and I find out that the swing arm bearings or the steering stem bearings have been neglected. This is something you can't really tell by just looking at the bike. These bearings are hidden, but if they're maintained at a regular interval, they should last an extremely long time. I maintain my steering stem bearings and my swing arm bearings once a season. At the end of the season, I'll re-grease the steering head and the swing arm bearings. Now that doesn't mean that I just don't pay any attention to it throughout the season. What I do is I check the steering head adjustment, and I'll also check the rear swing arm to see if it has any slop, side to side and up and down. This tells me if there's any play in the linkage bearings or in the swing arm bearings. I've had bikes before to where I would have like 2 or 3 millimeters of play at the rear axle. This to me is just too much. The steering stem, I'll check by grabbing the front forks about midway with the front wheel suspended and to see if I can rock it back and forth. This will tell me if I have any play at all. The other thing I'll do is I'll look to see how tight the nuts are on the triple clamp. So I'll take the top portion of the triple clamp off and I'll check those nuts that set the preload on that bearing. The other way to check is the side-to-side flop of the steering. There should be no movement in that steering head at all or in the bearings, but the steering should steer easily side to side. It should almost just flop over to the side. Some of the problems that I've seen with bearings or steering stem bearings, and this goes for the swing arm bearings as well, pitted races, pitted ball bearings, worn races, and flat spots on the bearings. This is where the roller stopped rolling and it got a flat spot in it. The bearings and races in my bike are still in great shape. I switched to taper roller bearings when All Balls sent me the conversion kit to switch my EX650 front end to my R6 front end. Now there's different intervals for different bikes as far as when you're supposed to service the steering stem bearings. I've seen some dirt bikes require the steering stem bearings to be greased every 2,000 to 3,000 miles. Now this is pretty understandable considering the conditions that the dirt bike is put into. It's running in dirt, mud, rain, extremely easy for something to get in there and mess them bearings up. Now if it's this important on a dirt bike, you can almost imagine what it's like on a street bike. And racing is no different. When you're racing and you're running corners wide and the bike just isn't acting the way it should, the simple things need to be looked at, like wheel bearings, swing arm bearings, or the steering stem bearings. And to go even simpler than that, check your tire pressure. So what I'll do is I'll repack the bottom bearing by just pushing grease in from the side. It's a little messy, but sooner or later you'll see grease start to poke up through the top side right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to wipe this cup out and then we're going to grease it. Going to put a thin coat of grease on it, not too thin, but you'll get the idea. We have our steering stem greased up really well. I like to dab excess grease around the outside. This ensures that there's going to be plenty of lube. Make sure not to do it too much because all the vibration will actually let that grease go down past the seal. I like to grease the seal up. I like to put a little bit of grease on the thread. So if you like what you've seen this week, please subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Something like that.